Good morning, everybody. If I look at the attendance in the room, I'm going to say that it was a better night than it is a morning today. But thank you for being here. You are the soldiers that keep the internet running. So we're talking about clouds today. I know I'm the fool that got myself into this. This is my fault. But we're going to try and make it interesting. It has been a bit difficult. Getting people to talk about the cloud has been particularly difficult. So some of you might notice that what's on the program is not the people that are sitting here. It is the cloud. So I just to get started, to give an overview of what's happening in the South African market, we're going to start with Graham, who's going to give a quick presentation, and then we'll get to the introductions of the people. So Graham, if you could start, thanks.
All right, thanks everybody for waking up early this morning and joining us. Hope everybody had a good evening last night. I know that there was lots of fun and games going on. First of all, my name's Graham Beneke. I'm the chairperson of the Internet Service Providers Association. So as one of the hosts of this event, I'd like to thank you all for attending. It's been great to see the turnout this week, and I hope you've enjoyed it. So thanks very much to everybody for that. There you go. Found the right button. Okay. So apologies to any of you who might have been in my session on Monday morning. This is the same slide deck, but don't worry, I'm not saying the same things. We're going to go in a completely different direction. So don't worry too much about the slides. This is just to set context. I'm going to be talking about completely different things. So ISPA was formed 22 years ago now. A group of ISPs over there. And at that stage, the primary objective of ISPA was to chase after the incumbents and try and liberalize the market. The incumbent was convinced that they had the sole right to provide any type of telecommunication services. They didn't see that the ISPs had any right to do what they were doing, and they wanted to rewrite the laws of South Africa to prevent the ISPs from doing the innovative stuff that they had been doing for a few years so that they could monopolize the provision of IP services. Now, obviously, there were a number of ISPs who'd been dabbling in this new thing called the internet for a while, and they felt that this was a problem. They got together, those 7 odd members, and they decided to address that problem. At the same time, they realized that addressing one single problem in isolation was probably not useful. So the other problem that they addressed was the interconnection and peering in the country. Because at that stage, the incumbent was firstly the only provider of long links out of the country. But at that stage, because the internet was largely not in South Africa, most local ISPs simply bought a single long, at that stage, not long fat network, but a long thin network, 64K, 128K in those sort of volumes, directly to the US, not even to Europe at that stage. And that was how South Africa connects to the internet. And if you had an email that you were wanting to send from your computer to your friend in the office across the road, it would go to the data center of the ISP, it would go to the US, rattle around the US for a bit, and then come all the way back via another long and particularly expensive link from the incumbent telco. Now, the point that I'm trying to make here is that this was 22 years ago. We've taken close on 20 years to mature our ISP market in South Africa. This is not something that's happened overnight. Sure, there are things that it could have encouraged this to happen quicker, but there's not a single button that you push or a single knob that you turn or a single regulation that you write that instantaneously brings you to a mature ISP telecommunications environment that supports things like the cloud, that supports opportunities to have software development industries or innovation or all of those other things that come as a side effect of a good solid foundation in telecommunications. ISPA has over the years, see if the next one. So ISPA has been open to everybody, all ISPs in the country, and that's always been our stated objective, but the incumbent obviously being the target of some of our initial court battles and presentations to governments and legislature and all the rest of it, felt out of place being involved, even though they ran an ISP and all the rest of it. But things evolve. We're now in a position where the incumbent is not a monopoly. They have not been a monopoly for a while, but these things also take time to shift in terms of markets. People have long-term contracts, people have long-term commitments, but we're now in a position where the incumbent is just one of a number of operators in this country. We've got the second national operator who's evolved a couple of names along the way, who's sitting with us up on the table, and then a number of other ISPs who were involved in telecommunications who've grown up and become large-scale telecommunications operators over the years. And we're now in a position where, as ISPA and along with the rest of the industry, we have to evolve and realize that the incumbent is actually one of us. The incumbent is actually just providing internet to people and trying to get internet to people faster and trying to deal with government regulation on how you're allowed to lay your fiber. And so that evolution means that we can't always stick to our guns on declaring eternal enemies and not being able to evolve, both as an association ourselves, but as an industry in general. This is an issue that you need to deal with in all industries and all sectors across the continent. And so our targets have changed over time. Our objective of exchange points is still key, but our target is now not the incumbent. Our target is now more generally the regulation of the telecommunication space in the country and how it affects all of us. There's a whole lot of stuff there that I'm not even going to go into, but it's around the telecommunications networks themselves. We're now starting to deal with issues of content. We're now starting to deal with issues of cybersecurity and cybercrime. These were things that people didn't even know about, but in terms of maturity of an entire industry, in order for the likes of Martin from Cloudflare and other CDNs to be able to come into our country, our regulatory environments need to be right and ready for those things. And governments are slow. To take an idea of a regulation or an idea of a law into something that is enacted and proven and tested in the courts of law and in government and all the rest of it can take 5, 10, 15 years. We've got some bits of law that are still somewhat in limbo 15 years later. We've got the South African equivalent of GDPR, which is very much still in limbo, even though it's been signed into law by the president and various other things. And there's a whole lot more there, some more criminal stuff that that I was referring to, and issues of cybercrime and these sort of things that are global problems, but within the context of an individual country, you have to keep up with the rest of the world. You can't be waiting around. Yep. I'm not going to go into all of the partnerships there, but as an industry association and as an industry community in South Africa, it's been important to engage with all of the both local and international organizations that form this global ecosystem that we've got of the internet. Specific people there that we'd be aware of across the continent, the African Union, ISOC in their various chapters and globally, and other organizations that affect us, ICANN, the RRRs, the number registry systems, the top level domains, the country level domains. These are all important stakeholders in this process. And the relationship with all of these organizations has to be mature, has to be established, and importantly, has to be stable. We can't, the quickest way to scare investors away from your country is to have instability and to not provide something that they can comfortably put their money out on the end of a long piece of string where they can't watch it, where they can't be sure that when they arrive back next time that the building won't have been bulldozed and their equipment has disappeared into some back alley and they never see it again. And so the internet exchange points were one of the things that ISPA realized was an important element of building the foundation of the industry. So the Johannesburg Internet Exchange formed in 1996, about 6-7 months after the formation of ISPA as an organization. And that has been running for 22 years now. We all understand the importance of exchange points. That's why we're here. The sort of foundational discussion that we're having here about peering and interconnection is around the activities at exchange points. Sometimes we get lost in the debates and the discussions and not understanding what the objective is and what the knock-on effects that these things have. In South Africa, as you're probably aware, we now have 6 exchange points. But this is not something that fits for everybody. In many countries, we see people trying to start up more and more exchange points, and sometimes it's not the right thing. In Johannesburg, for example, we have 2 exchange points. We have the Jinx and we have NAP Africa. And those 2 exchange points could not have survived without a very strong and mature industry demanding services from both of those exchange points. We see situations in some parts of the continent where people are looking to just create another exchange point because they don't like the one that's there already. And this often won't work unless you've got a very strong environment. You can only have one exchange point surviving in a particular area. It's been unusual for us to see in the South African market that we've had in the 3 cities 2 exchange points that have survived independently and continued to grow side by side in an environment where typically you see one or other just gradually grow and grow and grow and completely consume the market. But one of the things that we've had in South Africa, and I'm proud that we've been able to achieve this, is that we've had infrastructure diversity and reliability. So what the exchange points provide is the ability for networks to come into an area, and should their requirements and their budgets and their objectives demand it, they're able to connect to 2 exchange points. They're able to get infrastructure diversity, reliability, and this translates to many other areas as well. So having data center operators, multiple data center operators that can provide independence and diversity, having multiple cable systems, having multiple backbone infrastructure operators, diverse fiber routes so that you don't dig up the 2 sides of a highway and take out the entire country's internet. I'm going to skip over that one. So to give us a bit of a context of where we've come from, this was a newspaper clipping. I don't know how many of you actually still remember newspapers. We had them once upon a time. We used to get a piece of paper about this big. You arrived at your door and you used to read it to find out what was going on in the world. And this is a newspaper clipping from 1998, where ISPA was very excited that we had 16 megabits of traffic across our exchange points across the entire country. And that was exciting news at that time. I would estimate that now in South Africa, we probably have close to a terabit of peering traffic across all of the exchange points and all of the private interconnections in the country. And based on some of the information that was being shared yesterday by telegeography, I think it's another terabit of international capacity, roughly speaking. So we're looking at about 2 terabits of traffic compared with where we were at 16 megabits 20 years ago. And then obviously the impact of global issues is something that we can't shy away from. We can't sit back and say, well, we're underdeveloped, we're behind the rest of the world, so we're not going to worry about the rest of the world's problems. We're just going to focus on our own. And cybersecurity is one of these areas. The other area is IPv6. So IPv6 is very much a problem for the global internet. And most of our international contemporaries are feeling direct and real pain from this issue. You can't get IPv4 addresses cost effectively anymore. You can't build new networks and hope to get customers if you're only thinking IPv4 in the rest of the world. We don't have that problem in Africa. And so there's a big sense of, well, we'll deal with that problem when it comes. But the reality is the internet is global. And so global internet problems are our internet problems. Cybersecurity is a very similar one. We've seen in South Africa with our massive increases in bandwidth and capacity that we are now as much of a target to cybersecurity threats as anywhere in the Europe or the US or anywhere else. And so we can't sit back and say, well, this is a problem for later. We'll catch up when we've got regulations that we can copy from some other country. We have to deal with these things now. And there is ongoing activity in South Africa specifically to address these and try and solve these problems. And that's about all I have for now. I'm sure there's going to be Q&A time in the panel. So I'll leave, if you have any questions, then we'll leave them for then. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Graham. I just want to point out that newspaper clipping referred to a Cisco 2924 with a 3 gigabyte backplane. Can't fix that now. So, like I said earlier, I didn't properly introduce myself. So I'm Andrew. I work for Teraco Data Environments, and I run NAP Africa, the internet exchanges. And why did I want to talk about cloud? You know, when I initially floated this as a potential topic, you know, people balked and said, another talk about clouds. Why don't we just get Martin Levy to talk about IPv6 again? You know, because haven't we seen enough about it? And yeah, I mean, we have seen a lot of stuff about the cloud, but the reason that I wanted to do this is because now that the cloud is a real thing, you know, and I'm not just referring to the very large cloud providers. I'm referring to cloud providers, you know, in-country cloud providers. We have in South Africa a number of people that are running clouds and doing it very well. I was wanting to try and get people to understand what the cloud is. You know, everybody has this kind of concept in their mind of a cloud. It's just a thing that's there. It's virtual. It's all virtual. But very few people actually understand all of the nuts and bolts and the things that actually create the cloud. And we're seeing that more now because people are having these discussions more often. A couple of years ago, I was doing a presentation about data centers at the South African Institute of Electronic Engineers. And after the presentation, somebody in the audience stood up and asked, you guys are building all of these data centers and they're big and they're powerful and it's all very exciting, but now that the cloud is becoming a reality, is your business going to survive? Now, you know, this was a couple of years ago. It was the easy answer to that is, and I say this in most of my talks, is that everything that you do on the internet, whether it's a WhatsApp or you go on a web page or you download an email, it touches a data center somewhere, regardless of whether it is referred to as the cloud or not. So that was the easy answer. And I said to the guy, well, where do you think the cloud lives? And he sort of did that. The cloud is over there. And I thought that was a good answer at the time, but I didn't actually know, because we had never really thought about what impact the cloud would have, not just on co-location. What impact would it have on an entire market? Carriers, enterprises, ISPs, and it was something that we didn't think about back then, and it was an easy answer to give, but it does change the way that you have to think about these things. Us as a co-location provider, if you talk about clouds and virtualization and that sort of thing, it changes the way that we have to design and deploy facilities. And we're seeing this a lot more now. People are starting to talk about it. Executives have heard from somebody that there is this thing called a cloud, and are storming over to their technical people and saying, I want the cloud. And it's a thing that they think is going to change their world. And we have had a lot of these discussions recently in the last few months. And I think this was probably the biggest driver for me wanting to talk about the cloud. We've been into some of the largest enterprises in the country to have discussions about people connecting to the cloud. And we've been pulled in, not necessarily, some of these are not ever going to be direct clients of ours, but we've had to go in and explain to network teams, sit down with technical teams, in all of the enterprise sectors, and explain to them what the cloud is. Again, somebody said to me earlier, this is all opinion based, but you have to explain it from beginning to end. Start with the fact that you have to have physical connectivity. You then have to have layer 2 connectivity on top of that. And there's so many different pieces that get involved in actually getting you to the final product that you have. Trying to get people to understand how to actually use the resources that are available on the cloud is an entirely different discussion. And some of the cloud providers in this room, I'm not going to look at anybody specific, might tell you that even Teraco's own IT team struggles with making use of the cloud. And it seems to be an ongoing problem. I mean, you've all seen that meme that went around for a while saying that the cloud is just somebody else's computer. You've seen the Australian kitty that did that video about explaining what the cloud is, and effectively getting to the point that it's just a big box. It's a big box. Microsoft has got one. Google's got one. Amazon's got one. They have these boxes all over the place. And it's funny because it's true. We don't really understand the cloud. So to that point, and I just want to thank everybody that is on the panel today. Some of us are a bit last minute over here. So if it looks like we're unprepared, it's because we're unprepared. So if I could, we've met Graham already. I want to start with Dr. Angus Hay. If you could just do a quick introduction of who you are and what role you think that you play in cloud in South Africa.
Okay. Morning, everybody. Is everybody awake now? Has the coffee kicked in yet? Not quite. My background is, for those of you who remember that far back, Neotel, which was acquired by Liquid Telecom. So therefore, nowadays we are called Liquid Telecom South Africa. But you will also have noticed that in the last few months, we have carved out a division within Liquid Telecom South Africa, which is going to be part of an Africa-wide initiative, creating South Africa Data Center, a carrier-neutral data center brand. That's part of Africa Data Centers. We have the same thing in East Africa. We have the East Africa Data Center based in Nairobi. So that data center brand is going to be a separate brand under the Liquid Group, but carrier neutral and specifically addressing the data center open access carrier neutral market. So what I do is run South Africa Data Center nowadays. But in between all of that, I'm also involved with the rest of Liquid as a group. And of course, to tell you what we think we do, we've already figured out that we're the guys connecting Africa by running fiber from Cape to Cairo, which you've probably heard from Ben and a few others. But, simplistically, apart from it being somebody else's computer, what the cloud is basically is when you take bits of fiber and you string them together and you dot data centers across them, the data centers are the physical manifestation of that cloud. So what we believe, and apologies for the slogan, but basically, by combining fiber with data centers dotted across Africa, Africa's cloud is liquid.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, data center and carrier. Your data centers are in the cloud, are they? I'm going to do this a lot.
The cloud is in the data centers.
All right, cool. So, next we have Martin, who has been, I think, in all corners of the internet, generally has a lot to say.
Yes, I've been classified many ways. So I work for a company with the name Cloud in it, Cloudflare. But I think I'm going to take a slightly different approach to the subject at hand and talk about the importance of localization, which has been a theme of every day at this AFPIF and at previous AFPIFs. In order for a company like ours to be successful, and let's admit it, I mean, that's my goal. My answer to my company is that I'm about making Cloudflare successful. But I'm also, and again, those people that know me, I do spend a certain amount of my time making the internet better, wanting to improve the internet. And I work for a company that believes in that. So the creation of internet exchange points, the creation of data centers, of fiber that crosses, in the African sense, crosses borders, the need to bring cloud providers to a local environment. This is clearly what is both good for the internet, it's good for our company, it's obviously good for Africa and has been the topic of discussion, which has, by the way, for those people that were at the very early AFPIF meetings, the radical difference between then and now is amazing. I was just in the hallway talking about bandwidth sizes, and it completely matches, Graham, what you were talking about. When we talked about bandwidth in those very early AFPIF meetings, we've eclipsed that completely. So let's now look at this magical word cloud. Oh, and by the way, you mentioned this. If you haven't seen the Kitty video about cloud from whatever Australian talk show it came from, it is both hilarious and yet sadly true. And we'll, if anything, we should play it here, but let's leave that as an exercise for everybody to look up on YouTube. So let's go deal with this one point that I want to make, and then I'll turn off my microphone. Localization of hosted enterprise and internet services needs to be as default and, by the way, equally priced here within inside Africa as it is anywhere else in the world. Full stop. Actually, I should stop talking at that point because I've made my point. I will stop, actually. We'll wait for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And then lastly, we've got Brett. I mean, I don't think that you need to do too much of an introduction. Brett's got clouds. So, well, we don't know yet because we don't understand it. Brett is with Microsoft. I'm just going to go straight into a question. What has your perception been so far about the African market? And I know that you don't necessarily speak for the entire organization or necessarily are involved that much in clouds, but in general, what do you think has made Africa a viable place for the large cloud providers to be at?
Yeah. Hello. So I work on the Azure team, heading up network planning and strategy. And I think one of the key points that was already brought up is that the cloud is truly an end-to-end service. It doesn't just lie with rows and rows of servers or compute within a data center, but it's how well we protect, how well we connect those servers and allow that end users and customers to connect via the edge. So from that perspective, you know, focusing and coming to a conference like this where we're really diving into the edge, into interconnection, and how well we can localize traffic within Africa and within Southern Africa. I think it's incredibly relevant to the cloud discussion. You know, Microsoft we put edges in South Africa back in 2014. We generally, in most regions, have started small with something like even a 6-rack deployment, putting edge routers, putting a small edge compute CDN along with those edges. And then we kind of witness the growth, right? We do some analysis. There's a lot of business inputs from the business teams, whether it's Azure, Office 365. But we witness that growth and we start building a business case. And at least one aspect of that business case is how well we can connect, how well we can drive performance improvements across borders, between countries, and to serve an entire region from a particular edge or group of edges. So while edge planning and strategy is a network component, it is a significant component of the overall cloud. So we've, you know, the whole process here has taken a number of years. We're hoping to launch everything very soon. I'm not allowed to give any dates, nor do I have them. But I do think this conference is critical, and the topics that have been discussed here when dissecting the cloud in terms of how well we can connect to the market. How easily can enterprises and consumers adopt cloud services? A lot of that is dependent on the ability for us and others to interconnect, to peer, to do, you know, have direct services, to partner with local ISPs, to partner with local carriers in order to deliver the performance and the connectivity that's required to make the cloud truly successful and try and empower and enable an entire region. So that's where we're at. That's a little background on our focus. So while it is primarily on the edge, like I said, it's truly an end-to-end solution, and without everything in between, you know, the cloud really ceases to exist.
Thanks, Brett. So, just as much as we have had to start thinking about how this is going to impact the way that we do co-location. we had an interesting meeting, one of the enterprise meetings that I referred to. The question that came from this particular network team was that they have their headquarters in South Africa, but they have entities all over the world. And they have this extremely expensive MPLS network that connected, or that is currently connecting their on-site services. And their design goal at the end of the day was to use cloud so that they didn't have to have that network in between. Because you have now these various interconnection locations all over the world, and it suddenly started making sense to them to connect in that region so that they didn't need to have that that additional cost in between. Martin, I want to ask you, in a scenario like that, have you seen that happen in other markets, and what is the impact or potential benefits for carriers in a situation like that?
The answer is yes, we have seen it, but let's sort of pick and choose how you want to dissect that part. There's part of the question of saying, does legacy telecom services like MPLS still have a role, especially considering the expense of them? And the answer is no. Things like EVPN and IP-based VPNs are eclipsing those legacy systems left, right, and center at a ridiculous pace. So if you've got carriers that aren't offering that type of service at this stage, go find a new carrier. And innovative carriers exist. And so that's half the question. But the second half of it, which is the cloud-related stuff, is, well, do you do something different in the world of cloud versus what you did in the world of, again, legacy enterprise data centers and, firewalls racked and stacked in front of them? And again, the answer is, well, yes, you do. And it actually, there are plenty of use cases out there, and examples and white papers on how this is done. But there are some very key, key deliverables that the industry has provided that have made this happen. First of all is just the compute capability in itself. When you looked at early cloud offerings, you looked at simply, well, here's a glorified VM capability. And then the APIs and the deliverable controls around that have matured. And now you get to the point where you look at cloud providers who can offer sort of Kubernetes in the box, ready to go as part of a cloud service. So you don't even have to roll your own management. You can start, and I pick Kubernetes just as an example. Pick your favorite mechanism. It doesn't really matter. These start making it very easy, in theory, for enterprises to start moving compute into the cloud, which does not distract, if I may reaffirm this, from the need for large data center providers within the continent or with anywhere. Because, again, the old story: where do you think the cloud actually is? It's in those large data centers, and you need those large data centers in order to grow. It also isn't 100%. In other words, as much as you'd sort of like go, well, let's move it all in the cloud, and whatever the hell that means, and you could throw a Dilbert comic in at this point in time. The reality is that there are still going to be things that take a while to move, and they may not move. So there is still a requirement for high quality data centers with international security standards to exist inside the marketplace, because some things won't move, and they won't move immediately. But there's one other building block that matches the beginning of the conversation and the question you asked, and the cloud part, which is, how do you connect all this stuff? And that's where you see, call it what you like, some form of direct connect between the carriers and the cloud providers, where now you can offer both the compute in the cloud or you can be offered the compute in the cloud, and also then have a mechanism to interconnect that back to an enterprise. And this, whether it be the existing internet exchange environment that we know about, or private interconnects, which the data centers are now very well tuned to provide, or enterprise cloud exchange type products, which are showing up in various markets. All of these mechanisms tie the compute and the connectivity back to wherever the enterprise is. They tie it back together very nicely. So it looks like we have the confluence of all of the capabilities. We just need the faith and then the deployment inside this marketplace. The last part I'm going to just, because yes, I wear, I've got to keep the Cloudflare sort of mindset in here, is keep in mind that there's one other aspect of this, and cloud providers are doing this. Enterprises have understood this. The CDN industry, which is 20 plus years old, has pretty much preached the same story right from the beginning, but now it is because of the fact that DDoS mitigation is an absolute need within just about anything. The concept of a naked website, just a web presence that exists on a server or a set of servers in a single data center in one location in the world, that's gone. That has to go. That has no position in a modern day enterprise or internet app anymore. Yes, I'd like you to pick us as a CDN, but that's not the point. The point is you're wrapping a web service of some variety, which is what everything is turning out to be. You need to wrap that with a content delivery network in order to provide acceleration, in order to provide the localization. Those dots on the map are actually important because as much as we're sitting here in Cape Town in South Africa, this isn't the only marketplace that needs to be delivered to. So these components all exist. Maybe the only missing thing here is enterprises that are innovative and willing to make this jump. That's my pitch.
Then Angus, you mentioned earlier the SADC, but you also said that you had discussions internally about how the cloud is going to change the way that you build data centers. What is going to be different, and do you see this affecting smaller co-location operators? Do you see an impact, for example, in surrounding countries that might have plans to execute builds? How is that changing the co-location market?
I think that there are a whole raft of impacts there, but let me just go through the easy one. So first things first, don't fight it. If you can't beat them, join them, basically. There's no point in a let's call it a traditional co-location provider trying to fight the existence of the large cloud providers. I think, as has been pointed out, they are fundamentally the anchor tenants in co-location facilities regardless. That's a global phenomenon. And in Africa in particular, where we have a lot of edge, with one notable exception coming soon, the co-location providers are essentially going to be the hosts for the first wave of all of that global cloud. And without them, co-location is not really going to survive fundamentally, because data centers are much more than just physical facilities. They're also the places where those internet exchanges are going to be. They're also the places where everybody is going to meet. And as has been indicated, get access to the on-ramps to the cloud as well. So I think that fundamentally that's true. But how's it changed? Well, I think possibly the most obvious thing that you need to be conscious of when you step into the global market is that you're in the global market. Everything is that much harder to do because you're now having to meet global standards and you're competing on a global stage. So all kinds of things. And I think some of the things that are not obvious make it a lot more difficult to build data centers to meet those kind of standards than, for example, just meeting a local country expectations from, say, local enterprises. And I think it's particularly true in a number of countries in Africa, where expectations have not historically been very high. So let me just highlight a few examples. So let's take something like the power grid. So I had a conversation the other day with a well-known power provider. You've probably heard of them, called Eskom.
Which one?
Yes. And they're convinced they have no competitors in the world. You know, clearly they're not competing with anybody. Why would they be competing with anybody? They are the monopoly provider in the country. Until you point out to them that they are the reason why, hopefully, people would bring their data centers to South Africa. They are competing for the business of pretty much any other country in the region to attract data centers. And that's really important. So if they can't perform and can't keep their uptime at a level that is acceptable to global providers, the data centers will go somewhere else. But there's more to it than that. We've spoken a bit about internet. I mean, fundamentally, the connectivity is fundamental to this. You can't put a data center somewhere disconnected from the global networks now, because if it's not on the global networks, it's not part of that cloud, and the distributed functionality of the cloud is simply not going to work if you try to isolate it. Even if you try to isolate it in a country, it's not going to work. You know, you're going to have to hit 1.1.1.1. It's not going to help if you isolate this thing in the middle of nowhere. So there are then other challenges, regulatory challenges, engineering challenges, etc. But maybe just highlight one more, and that's security. And I'm not just talking about network security. That's obvious. In a security sense, the expectations of data centers now are that they are now the repositories of all of that information, which we are protecting with various acts across various countries to limit and to prevent the loss of personal information. So it doesn't matter what continent or country you go to, you're going to have some kind of privacy that is fundamentally going to drive how you operate a data center from a security perspective. So the security standards have ratcheted up significantly as a consequence of having larger global providers coming into the markets. So there's a whole lot of things. I think just maybe one final point around, where would you build data centers? And it's like property, basically. It's location, location, location. So if you take all of these things and put them together, you start to get to some kind of optimal position of where you want to put your data center. You need connectivity, you need a good power grid, you need local support, you need engineering, you need to be able to secure it. And then just don't forget the one big thing, which to some extent has not been a big focus for African providers, but believe me, this is a global issue and it's coming. And that is the degree to which these data centers are now green and environmentally efficient. So we all focus on the actual efficiency of the data center in terms of PUE and so on. But what we sometimes lose track of is that the whole value chain needs to be efficient. So just a little piece of information which may surprise some people. In South Africa, we can claim, roughly, that our power grid is about 15% green, of which 2/3 of that is hydro, and the rest is a smattering of solar and wind. What do you think the percentage is in Kenya? Take a guess. Any guesses? Percentage of green energy on the grid in Kenya? That's the East Africa data center. The answer is 70. That's more than double Europe. So we've got a long way to go to get ourselves up into that league. Okay.
Good point. All right, Graham, you are going to be representing the enterprises today. Since you deal with a number of enterprises, we're hearing cloud a lot more often. Are you seeing that? Are you getting requests about the cloud, about cloud connectivity? And if so, what type of enterprises is it coming from? What level within that enterprise, and is there an understanding of what they're asking for?
Yeah. So, I mean, in my day job, I work at an ISP that focuses on enterprise customers. So, yeah, I have these conversations with customers regularly. Um, it varies a lot. I think on average in South Africa, there's a lot less understanding and clarity about what they're getting from the cloud. There's still a lot of people um, who are just clinging onto the buzzword, and some IT manager or CEO or someone like that, CTO, CIO, has heard this buzzword at a conference, and they were told that there was a big percentage saving sign up on the presentation, and they go, I want that. It's going to get me a bonus at the end of the year. Make it happen. So I see the starting point of a lot of the conversations being that. Sometimes it creates false expectations, and people think that it comes back to what you were saying earlier about what is the cloud, where is the cloud, and there's this very real sense with many of the business leaders that putting it in the cloud makes all of my problems evaporate. By clicking this button, 90% of my issues evaporate. And very often the challenge is that, yes, there are certain percentage of the problems that are physical, that are power related, that are cooling related, that are in facilities and infrastructure related. But you are sometimes substituting one set of problems for another. The skills in Africa in general around implementing the kind of connectivity technology that is scalable and thus is what the cloud providers prefer is lacking. With all of the connections into most of the major cloud providers, you need to know BGP, you need to know how to build VRFs, you need to know how to do all sorts of firewalling and things, and be able to set up types of VPNs that we do have limited skills for at the moment. And so enterprises that are saying, well, let me evaporate my on-premises data center and put it in the cloud, then suddenly realize that the guy who's sat in the corner and says he's a network engineer is actually just a switch VLAN administrator and actually doesn't know much beyond that. So they
do more than that.
Well, this
switches, I mean.
Yeah, well, this is what most network engineers in enterprise that I interact with, they're either a firewall administrator, so they know there's a drop down that says HTTP, and they click on the drop down and they click allow, and then
outside of business hours only.
Outside of business hours, and then they add a VLAN to the switch because the HR department wants to be on their own VLAN. And beyond that, there isn't a solid understanding of IP, of networking, of routing protocols. And you cannot connect to Microsoft. You cannot connect to Azure and AWS and all of these other platforms unless you know how to do these things. The real drive at the moment in terms of knowing where they want to go is coming from the techies, the people who have a level of understanding about it, and in some cases the techies, once again, who keep on getting shouted at because that server in the corner just keeps on going down, and they want those problems to evaporate. So that's certainly a big driver for enterprise.
Thanks. Brett, I know that you claim you don't know anything about the cloud, but do you see that in markets? Do you have any sort of official position on that, on the skill set that is required, for example, on Azure? Is it what is your impression of going into a country globally and more specifically South Africa in terms of skill sets? What have the challenges been?
Yeah, I think if you guys caught Patrick's from Telegeography's presentation yesterday, he draws a lot of comparisons to South America, right? And he mentioned that South America is perhaps 3 to 5 years ahead of Africa in terms of the cloud and traffic localization coming into the continent. I tend to agree with that. I worked at level 3 prior to Microsoft during that time, and level 3 owning the global crossing infrastructure there. We did witness that, right? And putting data centers, localizing traffic, moving services, cloud services into places like Brazil had the same kind of questions, the same kind of challenges, the same type of partnerships that had to arise based on that sort of transition. So I think some of that comes with partnering with the local carriers. There is some education that occurs there. There's conferences like this that need to happen in order to sort of facilitate those conversations. But it does happen. It has happened in Latin America, and I think there's certainly some things we could learn from them, because we see a lot of growth there, right? And a lot of the ISPs have adapted their model. They've chosen to work with us to try and optimize the connectivity options there. Integrate their IT departments if there is an opportunity to move services onto the cloud. But the telecom sector didn't collapse in Latin America, right? They adapted. You see continued growth, continued investment. People like Google building more and more cables. There's definitely some good comparisons. So thinking about that presentation yesterday that Patrick gave, I think that's a good that's a relevant roadmap to what we could see and what we could achieve here in Africa.
Yeah, I was going to pause for a bit. Does anybody have any questions yet? Okay, so then I just want to ask something to all of you, whoever has an opinion on this. You mentioned, Brett, that the telecom sector didn't disappear, it didn't break down. Was there a revenue shift, any particular revenue shift? Anybody see any, or have any strong opinions on what would happen there?
So certainly what I'm seeing so far in South Africa is not a significant revenue shift away from operators. There is a gradual sense to which enterprise have realized that they can't exist within this insular little island within their building with a little thin pipe out to maybe another branch or out to the internet. There's gradually a understanding that being well connected to the internet is one of the first steps to getting onto the cloud. The second or third step is typically a big fat connection into a cloud provider, which is obviously actually an upside. It's an additional revenue, but in many cases, the first step that people are taking as an enterprise into cloud is not about infrastructure as a service, taking my servers and moving it out to somewhere else. It's about using Slack, using other hosted applications as a core business tool, something that's no longer hosted in the data center on the ground floor, no longer hosted in the building, things that are out on the internet. And it does give some CIOs nightmares to have business data out in the open and out on other people's servers. And then once the business has realized that this instant messaging app has become core to their business, they suddenly try and claw it back in-house and move it onto something that they control and whatever. But what the proverbial cloud is kind of the way it's sneaking into businesses is by businesses operationally looking for innovation, looking for the flexibility to take on new software, to take on new tools that the IT department is not actually able to build in a proper way, and then just going out to public software as a service platforms.
I actually wanted to ask you a question, and specific to enterprise. In terms of revenue, where traditionally one would think of an enterprise from a co-location point of view as somebody putting down tin, taking a couple of racks, using power, doing cross connection. How much of a shift do you anticipate now, where previously you had a potential footprint versus now potentially only being a cross connect?
Maybe just to make the point, I'm not going to give you any kind of estimate of numbers, but I think that let's just look at what that shift is all about. If you think about the fact that the services are essentially moving from on-premise and from sort of locally licensed services and hardware into a cloud environment, there is definitely a revenue shift. It means that our business model is shifting. It's shifting more towards being a provider to the cloud providers. But if I talk as Liquid Group rather than as the data center component, as Liquid Group, we are on multiple sides of that. So we have a partnership with Microsoft across the continent as a CSP. We make money selling the cloud. And I think just to put that in context, I think the point was made earlier that the cloud isn't just a bunch of virtual servers anymore. We're talking about an ecosystem of a range of kinds of applications, kinds of partners, kinds of services. So certainly there are entities and there are players out there that are going to suffer. If you're just selling hardware to small enterprises for their computer rooms, you may want to shift your business model. If you're just in the reseller business of locally licensed one PC type applications, you may want to change your business model. But that doesn't mean that those services are going away. They're simply moving, and you need to find your place in that cloud. So I think the opportunities are huge. And I think particularly when you look at these global cloud providers, is not to think of them as a challenge or somebody you need to take that you're trying to take on. You need to think of them as partners, and that's our view is certainly that we play in multiple parts of this space, but we want to be partners with the global cloud providers because they're part of what attracts customers to connect. The combination of connectivity and the cloud is a very, very powerful and sticky environment. So that's where you want to be. So I think, yes, some people have to change their business models, and that's where the revenue will shift. It's going to go away from the traditional IT services into the cloud, but there are opportunities to play in that cloud. It's not just the one or two or three large global providers that are dominating the margins there. Other people are playing in there. So I just want to add one comment on the point about resources, and it's maybe a slightly controversial comment, but this is our experience. There's a sense in which if we don't have the skills in the continent, then we must just import the skills. Let's let the global players bring skills or send skills, and they can then bring people to do things in the continent. Our experience is that doesn't work. And it doesn't work just because environments are so different. The operating environments and the way people work in different countries is very different. So our favorite kind of employee in this environment is actually somebody from the African diaspora who wants to come home, because they will have picked up the global experience. They've worked in perhaps in a cloud environment, in a global player, and they come back and bring the skills with them. That to us is absolutely the best kind of skill we would like to get.
We still need to be developing those skills locally as well. But Martin, you had a comment?
Yeah. I wanted to sort of expand on that a little bit, but talk about it from our experience. When we look at services that are done inside enterprises that have, parts of enterprises that are normally thought of as IT services, but now are outsourced, whether it be travel or HR or payroll, In some cases, even the company org chart. There's all things that are available in some form or other as a service. We see the quality of the deliverable far exceeding anything that's built inside an enterprise. And underlying that is, of course, well, it's built in the cloud. It's built with compute in more than one location in the world. It's built with a CDN. It's built with services like an OAuth or equivalent authentication. So inevitably, the IT department actually still controls the authentication, even though it's nowhere in house. And this is sort of the part where you can chip away at sort of the large enterprise, the classic old style enterprise IT, which was, oh, HR wants to do this feature for, vacation tracking, right? Well, we need 3 servers and a development team. It's like, no, what you need is a Google search and find somebody who does it that has the type of modern mindset. Oh, and inevitably that's cloud. So you actually sort of tick away at enterprise in a different way than just looking at saying, okay, fine. So you own the enterprise has got the basement floor and it's got this many racks of servers in what in modern day data center methodology is the most horrendous setup. And now you're going to migrate that. No, you actually may migrate on an application or use case by use case basis. In a way, I wish I could share with you a picture of a cubicle office. I think I took this picture 5-6 years ago, and along the side were the sort of where the managers sat. They had locked rooms, and then one of the rooms, had 3 or 4 UPSs, 2 racks of equipment, a lock on the door. Of course, you could climb over if you really needed to. And it was like, no, that's how we do our services. You look at these people and go, no.
Was there a broom inside there as well?
Was there a broom?
Yeah, and maybe a mop.
I didn't want to walk in. It was, it's sad when you see stuff like this. Okay.
All right, and then just to everybody. I mean, this is just the start, right? I know that the title of the talk had South Africa in the name, but I wanted to make this more about Africa. So, just a quick prediction: what do you think is happening in the next 5 years in Africa? Where are we getting to?
I think that in some respects, I mean, we've seen this in various areas. Countries that are behind in technology sometimes have an opportunity to leapfrog over certain technology eras. And in many respects, I think the rest of Africa does not have such a huge legacy of enterprise IT, enterprise ground floor data centers and all of that sort of thing. So I think the rest of Africa has a much easier psychological transition to using cloud services. Across the continent, you've been hosting your local content on international servers for ages in terms of public content. So it's not a massive leap to say your enterprise applications, as Martin was alluding to as well, your enterprise applications that are secure, ring-fenced internal systems, but just putting them out on a server outside to potentially steal some of Dr. Hay's thunder, the opportunity to put the data centers where they need to be is going to be dependent on the environments that are laid out, the foundations, be those regulatory, be those political, be those infrastructure and power utilities and all of those things. So it's going to gravitate towards the African countries that are open to receiving that. I mean, I think it was a tweet I saw from someone at Cloudflare saying that you need a front-end server within 10 milliseconds of all people. But you don't need a cloud provider within 10 milliseconds of all people. You probably need a cloud provider within 50 milliseconds of all people. And that excludes a lot of African countries potentially from seeing cloud rollouts. The Cloudflare CDN type of environments is going to carry on rolling out and making it easier for end users. But the clouds are going to gravitate towards those places where they see the best bang for buck, the best efficiencies, the best green energy that they can find. And we're not limited to one per country. And so each country needs to fight for their place in that market.
So just to, let me sort of try and steal my thunder back here a bit. But I agree with Graham. And I think that's absolutely true. I think there's no continent in the world where everybody assumes that the cloud is going to be completely distributed across every single country. We've got to accept the fact that there's a regionalization, and there's a kind of natural regionalization within Africa. So we can see the hubbing within Southern Africa. We're seeing that in East Africa starting to happen now. Definitely, there's movement in West Africa towards some sort of hub, and there's some debate as to which country that may be, and even if, depending on how you look at North Africa, you see a similar kind of thing as well. So yes, there are going to be hubs, and I think what we're going to see is slowly but surely that the number of hubs will grow and the size of those hubs will grow. But that's where the focus needs to be, is on really getting the economies of scale within those hubs. And I just want to leave you with one little trend, which it's not often that you get what they call a blinding glimpse of the obvious. It suddenly strikes you that something has changed. We're about to land a new submarine cable in South Africa. Now I can see everybody is pricking up their ears saying, great, where's it going? US, Europe. I've got bad news for you. The submarine cable we're about to land into South Africa is going to South Africa. It's coming from the Indian Ocean to South Africa. Why? Because we are the hub. We've grown up. We are no longer at the edge of the internet. We are now the hub for Southern Africa. And therefore, people want to connect to us.
Martin, come on, I know you got something to say.
Yeah, Graham's correct. We were quoted as saying that you need to be within 10 milliseconds of every user in order to supply the type of internet experience that's important. And by the way, remind yourselves why you're sitting here and who paid for you to get here. Ultimately, it's the consumer. Ultimately, it is that mobile user in whichever country you've come from, that enterprise user sitting at a desk. They're all paying for connectivity services, and then they're paying for services that they can access through that connectivity. Not everything on the internet is free, in fact, far from it. So getting a good response, and talking from a CDN point of view of this 10 millisecond magic number, which, by the way, if we ever succeed at getting it globally, we'll convert it to a 5 millisecond statement, and then we'll convert it to 2.5 milliseconds, et cetera, et cetera. So in order to deliver some of that, you need not only the good data centers, the good internet exchanges, and the good networks that actually interconnect with those said data centers and said IXs. But it actually turns out, just because you're a content delivery network doesn't mean that you want to always be replicating something from 250 milliseconds away on the East Coast of America when you're sitting here in Africa, or the same statement if you're sitting in Brazil, or the same statement if you're sitting in Australia. Now, these are all Southern Hemisphere statements, which is actually, by the way, an interesting problem in itself. You need the core compute in those areas as well. Now, content delivery networks are also in the business of providing edge compute capabilities, but they are edge compute, where you're doing things that can be related to the consumer and to the end user very efficiently. But they aren't the large databases. They aren't the massive data stores. They aren't what you really need to get to. So both the large data centers and priced appropriately, I think I said that earlier, and I'll repeat that, Just because this is Africa does not mean that the pricing should be any different than Seattle or Ashburn or Dublin or Frankfurt. Now, I know that's actually a very hard statement to actuate into real life, but it should be a goal. And it's the same goal that was taken up by Latin America, same goal that was taken up by Australia. That price differentiator has to go away because the consumers have the identical requirement. So getting to 10 milliseconds it's absolutely a company goal, and it's unbelievably painful when you sit here. In Europe, trivial. And in North America, beyond trivial. But that's part of the goal of sitting here and preaching why this has to go. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think, launching not just the Azure cloud, but as we see acceleration among many different clouds and a lot more investment in the market, there's a number of positive externalities that we've discussed here, and one of them that we certainly hope for is the continued and accelerated investment in infrastructure. One thing that comes to mind is how much I learned yesterday on Ben's presentation showing those really unfortunate trace routes. How do we eliminate those types of scenarios? And a lot of that comes into folks like Liquid and others helping drive the investment there, build cross-border connectivity, creating interconnection hubs, perhaps more than just a couple. We kind of look at this like East Africa and West Africa. There has to be one in each, but really start, building out the necessary infrastructure to sort of match the cloud investment that's going in the big, large-scale DC type stuff happening in South Africa for now, but perhaps in more countries in the future. The edge compute capabilities continue to grow. I know the CEO of my company talks a lot about the intelligent edge and some of the compute capabilities they're developing as far as IoT and AI and all the other sexy buzzwords. So we'll continue to see development there. But ultimately, yes, I think it comes down to us, the community working together and putting business cases in flight to help drive that connectivity and ensure that that investment continues.
Thank you very much. We are at time. Does anybody have very quick questions? Yeah. No, videos are controversial. But I do. Try and see the video. It's quite an entertaining video. I want to thank all of you for coming. I know for some of you it was very short notice, so thank you very much for all of the insights. I don't know about you guys, but I still don't know what the cloud is. So.